Hello, YouTube. There was a fascinating attempt to reach the moon in the early 20th century, but very few people know about it. I'll describe it and also the unfamiliar Russian terms and largely unknown in the West persons, but at the end of this video. Among the turbulent events of the year 1917 in Russia, the mysterious disappearance of Ivan Kovin turned out to be almost unnoticed. A space researcher set off on a flight in an aircraft of his own invention, intending to reach the moon, and disappeared without a trace. Ivan Fyodorovich Kovin was one of the wealthiest residents of Moscow of his time, and could have become a worthy successor to the old believer merchant dynasty. However, the enthusiast, who was passionate about science, used all his father's considerable inheritance to achieve a fantastic goal: to make the first interplanetary flight in history. Even as a youth, he had a burning desire to build a giant catapult for flight, and later began to look for other practical ways to solve the problem. Already in his teens, he showed remarkable engineering abilities and designed a tower with the height of 40,000 versta, 42,672 kilometers, from which ships or craft can be launched into the airless space using a catapult. The troposphere is located at the altitude of up to 15 kilometers from the Earth's surface. Above are the upper layers of the atmosphere with thin air, which are called airless space. NASA considers the boundary of space to be 122 kilometers from the Earth's surface. At the same time, Kovin was not an illiterate, self-taught man. His wealthy father approved of his son's hobbies and sent him to study metal science at the Paris Polytechnic Institute. After completing the course, the future space traveler returned to Russia. Kovin organized a metal laboratory where he developed the viscous Kovin armor, an 18-kilogram plate shell that covered the soldier's torso and protected him from bullets fired from the Mosinsk trilinear rifle. Along the way, Kovin joined the discussion about flights in the cosmic ether, because no one in those years knew that interstellar space was filled with a vacuum, and he was prone to the ideas of cosmism. At first, he was developing a project for an interplanetary airship that would fly on hot air. But then he became disillusioned with this idea. Kovin also rejected the concept of a jet engine. Your calculations convince me that this is not an engine, but a moth, a glutton, a self-eating entity. Should 9/10 of the weight of the projectile be given to fuel, but it would be also desirable to return from the moon, the inventor wrote to Konstantin Tsiolkovsky. Kovin defined the goal of his life as the creation of an ethereal apparatus. At that time, Nikola Tesla's theory that space was filled with ether was very popular. When his father died, the engineer-inventor became the owner of an inheritance of 350,000 rubles. Being an intelligent man, he placed them in various banks, Russian and foreign, receiving an annual rent of about 30,000. With this money, Kovin began to design the apparatus, a craft on which he was going to fly to the moon. That's when he became friends with the Russian promoter of science and teacher Konstantin Tsiolkovsky, who recommended Kovin to build an interplanetary airship. The engineering idea went further, and the inventor realized that magnetic force must be used to fly to the moon. He decided that the speed of propagation of electromagnetic waves exactly corresponds to interplanetary distances. Korovin believed that magnetic poles can attract or repel apparatuses created from multi-pole magnets. He identified the village of Stepnoye, Ostrogorsky district, Voronezh region, as one of these poles, and he bought his estate there. In Stepnoye, Ivan Fedorovich was building a workshop to create this airship, smelting ore from the Kamchatka mine and generating electricity from his own wind farms. A narrow gauge railroad was even constructed to the estate. By the way, during the First World War, the workshop also produced trench shields by the government's order. Korovin begins to buy meteorites all over the world, looking for multipolar magnets in them. From 1908 to 1916, he organized several expeditions to Kamchatka to extract new unknown metals from geyser salts, conducted geomagnetic research all over the Earth, including Antarctica, acting as a co-investor of the famous Scott expedition. As a result, Ivan Korovin focused on studying the principles of magnetism. In particular, he defended the theory of the existence of multipole magnets. After melting a special ore that he brought from Kamchatka, Korovin constructed an aircraft from the resulting metal, which, according to him, was supposed to rise into the air using electromagnetic waves. At the same time, the craft could allegedly move in any direction, regardless of the external environment, and be controlled by a special steering wheel. After the tests, Korovin promised to hand over all his secrets to the new Russian state. At that time, the Tsar had abdicated, and the democratic provisional government was in control of the former empire. In August of 1917, Korovin announced the end of work on this ethereal airship. He sent out invitations to friends, acquaintances, and just famous people, to whom he offered to become a spectator of the launch of the first flight to the moon. Thus, the Russian writer Alexei Tolstoy was among the invited guests. The flight was scheduled for August 21. Korovin chose his own estate Stepnoye in the Voronezh province as the launching pad, where, as I said, in his opinion, one of the Earth's magnetic poles was located. After gathering his friends, Korovin told them that he had set up a cabin inside the aircraft with a 2-week supply of air. Inside, there was an armchair bed, a folder with writing materials, and a supply of provisions. The ethereal traveler intended to observe the flight through the porthole. For the first time, Korovin expected to climb to an altitude of 100 versta. According to modern data, this is close to the age of space, and promised to go to the moon later, in the autumn of 1917. Russian history researchers describing further events refer to an article by journalist Dragunov, published in the issue of the newspaper Provincial Gazette, dated August 10, the new calendar would have it as August 23, 1917. By controlling the magnetic rudders and sails, you can make the apparatus move in the right direction, up, down, to any of the cardinal directions, without requiring any coal, firewood, or gasoline. The apparatus is like a sailboat, for which there is always a tailwind. The idea of the device was suggested to him by his friend Tsiolkovsky, an elderly gentleman with a hearing tube. First waves his hands in protest and then bows shyly. There is a passenger cabin inside the apparatus. The size of a comfortable compartment contains everything an ethereal traveler might need. an absolutely transparent porthole window, an electric lamp, an armchair, a log with writing materials, hygiene products, a supply of food and drink, and most importantly, air for 2 weeks. However, Mr. Korovin argues that in interplanetary space, in the absence of weight, food, drink, and air will be consumed incomparably less than on Earth. The cabin is completely protected from both severe frosts and the hellish heat that reign in the sky at the same time. He intends to climb to an unprecedented altitude of 100 versta, after which he will return to Earth. The device needs to be improved, and therefore I will go to the moon later, perhaps at the end of autumn, the inventor promises. He hugs his friends and goes into the cabin, locks the door from the inside for a long time. The door is arranged like the hatch of an underwater vessel and is tightly pressed to the surface. Suddenly, the apparatus rises into the air completely silently. Now he is at an altitude of 10 sajan, 20, 100. We all cheer together in honor of the pioneer of the ether. Meanwhile, the apparatus continues to gain altitude. After a quarter of an hour, it becomes a tiny speck. The observation is carried out through spotting tubes placed on tripods in advance and through binoculars. We use the field phone to contact Mr. Korovin's assistant, who is located 5 versta away from us. He and another assistant, who is on the terrace of the estate, check the data and after performing special calculations, report that the apparatus has reached the altitude of 15 versta, a world record. But this is just the beginning. The ascent is not over. The audience is refreshed with tea and coffee. The altitude of 100 versta has been reached, and now Russian Icarus is climbing higher and higher. Finally, by midnight, he rises so high that even a telescope is powerless to find him in the starry sky. We're waiting until morning. We continue to wait and hope. End of the article. It is not known what happened to Korovin next. He did not return, and the flying apparatus or craft could not be found. According to one hypothesis, the first space explorer lost control and was swept away from our planet. According to another, Korovin did not even rise to the announced altitude and crashed in a deserted place. Witnesses saw Korovin's glowing airship rising higher and higher into the air until it became completely impossible to distinguish it. The explorer did not return to the Earth. The search for him on the territory of several provinces did not bring results. Skeptics point to the mythic features inherent in this story. If Korovin really invented a previously unknown principle of aeronautics, then why didn't he conduct demonstration flights at a safer altitude, at least from city to city? It is possible that the design that he came up with was an ordinary balloon, and having risen to a great altitude, the pilot lost the ability to control it. However, it is noteworthy that the idea of creating an airship for traveling to the moon has significantly outlived Ivan Korovin. In 1928, rumors attributed the construction of such an apparatus to Konstantin Tsiolkovsky. The scientist was supposedly conducting experiments with metallic zeppelin. Perhaps it was about the embodiment of his early project of a rigid cargo airship, or perhaps it was already about testing the first rocket. However, Korovin, the inventor, continued to live on in Tolstoy's novel Aelita in the form of the engineer Lось. The writer also gave character traits and biographies to Korovin and two heroes of the novel, Engineer Garin's Hyperboloid, the engineer Garin himself and Professor Mantsov. By the way, in the novel Aelita, Tolstoy used cryptic knowledge and ancient sources. about the escape of Earthlings from the vanished civilization to Mars in an egg-shaped craft. Now, for some explanations, as I promised. Versta is an obsolete Russian unit of length, defined as 500 sazhen. This makes a versta equal to 3,500 feet. Sazhen, I think, is about 7 feet. Now, Russian cosmism is a later term for philosophical and cultural movement that emerged in Russia at the turn of the 19th century and again at the beginning of the 20th century. There was a burst of scientific investigation into interplanetary travel, largely driven by fiction writers such as Jules Verne and H.G. Wells, as well as philosophical movements like that Russian cosmism. It entailed a broad theory of natural philosophy combining elements of religion and ethics with a history and philosophy of the origin, evolution, and future existence of the cosmos and mankind. It combined elements from both Eastern and Western philosophic traditions, as well as from the Russian Orthodox Church. Of course, after the communists usurped power over the former empire, destroying the provisional government, and introduced their totalitarian socialism, the church, a religious institution, was removed from any significance and was under the control of the regime until 1991, when the communism disintegrated in the former USSR. The old believers, the so-called old ritualists, are Eastern Orthodox Christians who maintain the liturgical and ritual practices of the Russian Orthodox Church as they were before the reforms of the Patriarch Nikon of Moscow in the 17th century. Resisting the accommodation of Russian piety to the contemporary forms of Greek Orthodox worship, these Christians were discarded. Anathema was placed on them, together with their ritual, producing a division in Eastern Europe between the old believers and those who followed the state church in its condemnation of the old rite. Russian speakers refer to the schism itself as raskol, indicating cleaving apart. In translation, Konstantin Eduardovich Tsiolkovsky was a Russian rocket scientist who pioneered astronautics, space exploration and flight, along with Hermann Oberth and Robert H. Goddard. He is considered to be one of the pioneers of space flight and the founding father of modern rocketry and astronautics. That's what I wanted to let you know today. The story of a very unusual attempt at the bold researcher, brave thinker who disappeared without a trace, which in itself is very interesting, and it would be interesting to continue the search for him, but it's been over 100 years, so I'm not holding my breath for that, but it's very interesting, like I said. We'll see. If you like my research, please support me through the links you will find in the description to this video. Please like my videos. Please subscribe to my channel. Please tell others. Thank you for your attention to my work.